Welcome to episode 39 of Accessible Finance, where we demystify personal financial topics and answer questions so you leave saying, I get it now. I'm Eric Johns.
And I'm Rachel John.
Let's dive in.
All right. So, Eric, we have talked about this kind of tangentially in some of our previous podcasts, but without a doubt, one of the most pressing questions when clients come to us or prospective clients come to us is, one of the first questions we ask is, well, what brought you in today? Like, what made you decide to seek out working with a financial professional? And without a doubt, it's inevitably, I want to make sure I'm on track. I want to make sure that I can retire.
Correct.
So I think that being able to really expound upon what we do when somebody comes to us with that, kind of what we look at, it's going to be quite comprehensive. So it will probably span a few episodes. But if we start right at the very beginning, someone comes and says, hey, am I on track? Can I retire? Where do we go from there?
The first thing that we're going to think about, and this might come as a shock to those of you who've listened to more than one episode, is cash flow, right? We're going to think about cash flow. Why is that? Because the more cash that we spend, the larger the principal that's going to be required, or the larger capital, larger nest egg we need in retirement to fund that spending. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to break down your cash flow. What does that mean? We're going to look at the amount of spending that you incur on a monthly basis, an annual basis for the last number of years. Because it's unlikely that if you come to us and you're spending $10K currently and you're telling us you're going to spend $4K in retirement, we're going to ask you to how, right?
Like, please elaborate.
Right.
Well, and I think it's important to discuss the fact that when we have clients that we're working with or prospects we're working with, and when we're talking with them, before we've even gotten into talking about the numbers, we really want to talk about some lifestyle questions and know the unique circumstances around those individuals, because retirement does not look the same for everybody.
No, not at all.
So even if, couple A and couple B both decide they want to retire at 60, couple A's version of retirement might be microwavable dinners, watching Price is Right. Couple B, you never know. Couple B might be like we're taking
traveling internationally.
We're going to Europe. What? No, okay. We're on backtrack. They're going to Disney.
No, it was much better the first two.
But if your idea or what you envision for retirement is something that requires substantially more dollars, that has to be factored in.
Correct.
Additionally, if you have somebody who's like, I hate my job, I want to retire ASAP, that is the most important thing to me. I want to retire at 55 or bust. We need to know that. If you have someone who loves their job and who even in retirement is like, I'm still going to continue, I'm not going to full stop retire. Maybe they're fine retiring at 70. All of those factors matter. So before we even start talking granular numbers, we need to know what scenario we're kind of looking at with the couple.
Right.
But then we do start talking about those numbers. We do want to look at cash flow. We want to look at filling in just a variety of variables. So now you're talking the cash flow.
So fundamentally, right? Everyone this should come as no surprise to anyone. When you're working, you're gaining wages from your from your employer, right? And you're going to get that in W-2 income.
Correct.
You're now going to stop working. You're going to stop generating those wages. You have to think about retirement as either a systematic withdrawal from the funds that you have, or you need to be generating that income in some other way. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at your cash flow, right? Let's assume we've got your cash flow now, and let's assume that you spend, call it $10K a month.
Yeah.
We're then going to find out how much of that is going to be offset by your income from things like Social Security. Maybe you have a pension, right? Some of those still exist. They're rare, but they exist.
Correct.
All right. It's also worth noting some people might not actually participate in the Social Security system because they work for the government or a railroad, or essentially they didn't pay into Social Security.
Right.
And so they're not entitled to receive those benefits from the program, right? So we want to know what your Social Security benefits are going to be. And since those are inflation adjusted, we're pretty happy to just reduce the income that you need on a one-to-one basis. Does that make sense? So we don't have to worry about if you have an annuity, right? Most annuities are just going to pay you a flat nominal amount. So they might pay you $1,000 a year or $1,000 a month, let's say, in 2024. But then if you live to 2040, it's still paying you $1,000 a month. Well, an unfortunate reality for you to now,
is that $1,000 20 years from now is not going to buy the same thing.
No, not even close.
Anyone who has put kids through school or tried to buy a house
college
knows
education,
this very well. Precisely. And I think that, there's a number of variables that we talk to our clients about to really nail down what assumptions we want to make because we don't have crystal balls. We can't automatically know um, what those are going to be. We want to make assumptions that we know clients are comfortable with, such as, um, what inflation may do. Now, we certainly have recommendations and thoughts and things that we kind of use
Mm,
as industry standards. But it's important for us to try and differentiate with our clients, like what is the most important variable here to you? If it's I don't want to change my lifestyle right now whatsoever,
right.
so make everything else fit my current spending patterns, sure. If it's I hate my job, I want to retire at 55, make everything else fit that, sure. But we can't have such rigid fixation on I want this all to be the same
Correct.
because we can't make
Yeah,
that
there's a
puzzle work.
unfortunately, there's a lot of
Yeah.
desire to have your cake and eat it too, right? Like, so a lot of
Exactly.
people are like, well, I want to retire early
Yeah,
and I also want to spend 10K a month.
correct.
And I also, like,
In retirement, I really want to spend 15 because now I want to go travel
sure,
Europe.
international travel, and I want
Yeah.
to fund,
Well, 529.
529s for a bunch of kids and
Exactly.
grandkids and buy
Exactly.
my kids a house and also leave
Exactly.
this huge legacy. Like, no, like you can't do
And I
all that.
do think it's hard because it's $1 million still seems like for people like if people are coming to us, typically if they're coming, am I on track? Can I retire? We're talking about people in their 30s usually, right? Who are looking to make sure that they're on track. We certainly have people closer to retirement being like, am I on track? But the runway becomes a lot shorter.
Right.
But if we have, young professionals who are in business now, they're making money, they're looking to do that. $1 million still seems like a really big number. And the unfortunate reality is that
By the time they
it's
get to retirement, it's very unlikely to be.
correct. So $1 million is not the same as it was when we were seven
Well,
and eight and
sure. I
thinking
mean, you
about
can
it.
think one way to think about it is if we're talking about that 4% withdrawal rate when we've
Yeah.
talked about tests that have been done over time, um, that's $40,000 a year that you'd be generating from
Hmm.
your $1 million, right? So you
Correct.
just take a million, multiply it by 0.04. That's what you get. You get $40,000 a
Right.
year. Is that going to be enough inflation adjusted, like,
Correct.
forever? I don't know. Well, we would have to know your cash flow. We have to know what you're getting from Social Security and everything else. The
Right.
point is, I guess, the way we would think about it is we try to we use software to help, right?
Mhm.
But we're going to try to show you what levers we can pull to change the outcomes, like to change the probability of success, essentially,
Correct.
right? And so there are going to be trade-offs. If you want to retire earlier, you will need to either spend less money, make more money, save more money, like you're saving.
Correct.
There may be a combination of all of these things. And so like that's how we want really people, the listeners really to be thinking about retirement.
Mhm.
There's no when we say it depends, it's not because we just enjoy punting.
Or because we don't know.
Right.
It's because it's very, very uniquely
It
tailored to
does
your individual
actually
circumstances.
depend on your
Correct.
social security statement and your
Correct.
years of earnings. Like, like it depends on all of these things. And so
Correct.
it's
And so,
just
like, the
your
variables,
spending habits are at the top
yes,
of that list.
yes, the variables are levers that we tend to look at and adjust are things like what age are you planning to retire at? If you're married, what age is your spouse retiring at?
Mm.
Spending per month pre-retirement and then spending per month post-retirement. And like you said, you touched on this. I think that there is a very common misconception that in retirement, I suddenly won't have to spend as much. But the reality is that you have more time on your hands to fill.
Right.
So
We've heard of the
yeah,
80% of your salary rules and everything else, or like 80% of your current spending, you'll spend about
correct,
80% of that in retirement. Like
correct,
maybe,
correct.
maybe not. There's smile spending where you spend a little
Yes,
bit more at the beginning of retirement, and then as retirement
as you
goes
age,
on,
right,
it decreases, and then it goes up at the end because you
for
have end of life
long-term care,
care
right.
and live
Well,
in help and things like that.
it's also we've seen a huge uptick, and tell me if you agree with this, but I think we've seen a huge uptick in people coming and saying, "Hey, I saw how my parents' retirement went. They worked, and by the time they retired, they weren't in shape enough, or they weren't spry enough to be able to enjoy it."
That's right. Go
Well,
on. That's
thank you.
funny.
It was a good use.
Yeah.
But they were like, they essentially couldn't enjoy retirement the way I want to. I want to do things in my retirement. Um, in order to do that, we tend to want to retire on the earlier side than our parents did, and doing things requires money.
Right.
So the typical thought of retirement being a like cheaper alternative by monthly cost than while working is just turns out not to be the case.
Right.
Um, we also discussed like some assumptions, or one of the levers or variables is what age you are assuming you will
Die.
die.
Yeah.
Yes.
You have to know your
Um,
plan.
correct. Oh, I just got something in my eye. Um,
Sorry to hear that.
sorry.
Unfortunate.
Again, like Eric said, Social Security, both when you're going to take it and how much you're going to be getting, and if you're going to be getting it at all.
Yeah, then there's some investment stuff like
Correct.
what are we going to assume is the rate of inflation? What are we going to assume is your rate of return on
Correct.
your total portfolio? Right. So
Correct.
then baked into that is what is your long-term market assumption for equities versus fixed
Correct.
income?
What types of retirement accounts have you contributed to beforehand? Now,
Right.
if you're coming to us at 30, there's a lot of things that we can do proactively to fill up those retirement
Right.
accounts so that we have a bit more flexibility there. So
There's
the
still
earlier we're working is
yeah, you have
better.
more runway there, but you have a ton of planning to do leading up to retirement. So like let's
Yes.
call it between 55 and 65 or the year that you're actually going to retire. It doesn't have to be 65, it doesn't have to be 67. It really doesn't have to be any number.
Those are your really impactful
Right. So
years.
we need to talk about things like when are you going to elect Social
Correct.
Security? Like how does that what factors should we be considering? We've
Correct.
had an episode on that, age of a spouse and things like
Yep.
that, like life expectancy. There are also things like long-term care. How many years do you think you might need long-term care? Like what does dementia look like for you? Does it run your family?
Correct.
Um, does Alzheimer's run your family? Like dementia, like how long? So some of these things aren't going to be covered by your healthcare. We're going to
Correct.
do a whole episode on Medicare and what exactly that looks like because that
And
can be a
as you
pretty
get
daunting
closer to
process
that
too.
retirement, you tend to have a better grasp on what types of medical challenges you may have individually, or what, is coming down the pipeline.
Correct.
So there are so many things to consider. It's no wonder that when people are coming to us, it's very daunting and they're just like, am I on track? Like, somebody please look at this, because it can be so overwhelming. And to be honest, without having this software to run iterations and projections based on various assumptions, like, it becomes very, very challenging to do. So like we end up saying, okay, like let's say that your monthly expenses are 10K. What happens if your monthly expenses right now go down to 9,500? Like, how does saving 500 a month
Yeah, how does it
impact
move
you?
the needle, right?
Correct.
And what exactly is the measurement tool that we're using? So when we plan, we're using Monte Carlo success rates as a proxy for risk of failure, essentially, right? So if we had a 50% probability of success in Monte Carlo, that would mean 50% of the time, or in 50% of the
Scenarios.
yes, that we
Yeah.
run, right? We execute 1,000 scenarios based on returns that are worse than the worst market assumptions
Mhm.
we've seen and better than the best,
Correct.
right? And we run a
So it
thousand
literally spans the gamut of
yes,
everything.
exactly. And we that way we can adjust for time, right? Because if you just ran a singular scenario using like a on average, like a 5% rate of return or something, it's just going to be a linear projection and we can see that. But that's never how the market works.
Correct.
It's far more volatile than that. Bond markets included, right?
Correct.
Fixed
And it's
income included.
important to understand, what does my retirement look like if I have to start making withdrawals when the market's at an all-time low? What does it look
Yes.
like if I get to make withdrawals when the
Yes.
market's at an all-time high?
Right.
Like, we don't know at what point in time you are forced to start making those withdrawals to fund your retirement. Ideally, it happens when the market's doing great, but we can't know that. And so we want to make sure that we're prepared for all potential scenarios, and the Monte Carlo does that and then some.
Right.
Um,
So the idea is like you can do this. I believe the calculators, there's a free one at myretirement.com if you want to do your own thing. Like obviously you can contact a financial planner, like shameless plug, this is what we do.
Sure.
But if we're just trying to fundamentally help you guys to think
Yeah.
about it, right? It's there's no certainty that we can assure you. Even if you have like the amount of cash under your mattress, like there's some risk, right? Like somebody breaks into your house and takes it, your house
Correct.
burns down, and so does the cash under your mattress. Like
Yeah.
even if you had like $1 billion on your mattress, like theoretically there's some chance of failure. Like it's not particularly high.
But it's not zero.
Exactly. So the idea is when can you retire, right? So you should be thinking about things like how much money do I actually need? What are my expenses going to look like in retirement? Is that meaningfully different than now? And then like I'll say this, people without exception underestimate their spending.
Yeah.
Everyone underestimates their spending.
To varying
I
degrees.
underestimate my
Yes,
spending.
for
Like
sure.
it's a thing that humans do. They
Correct.
just assume that, only the things that are top of mind are what we
Right.
spend on, or, this is very prevalent. This is anomalous. This month is an anomalous month. I spent 12K this month, but I almost never spend 12K. My average spending is 4K.
I think that's the most
12K
important
this
thing.
month.
Correct. And I think that like
Well, when you average that 12K,
I think part of that is because the average person is not checking and running their finances monthly. So
right.
maybe the last time you looked a year, 2 years, 5 years ago, your spending
Yeah,
was
maybe it was
5,000
4K
a
a
month.
month.
Exactly.
And then
So
2022 happened
it's
and
hard.
2023
And
happened.
and one thing we work really, really hard with our clients to try to do is help not to, judge one way or another on their spending, but just to basically shine a light on and say, hey, this month, this is what you spent. Um, so that they know if the assumption that we're making or the variable that we've set on to make sure they're on track for retirement is like your goal is 6,000 a month. We want to let you know, like, hey, you spent 5,000 this month. That is very worthy of celebration.
Right.
Awesome job. Or hey, this month you spent 7. It's not to say that like you were bad this month, but it's important to know, like, okay, if this month was an higher,
Yeah, you spent
I can make
18%
up
more
for
than
another.
average or
Right.
whatever, right?
Exactly. But I will second that wholeheartedly. I think everyone underreports, not intentionally,
Right.
um,
So
what their expenses are.
so takeaways.
Yeah,
Try to get a handle on your spending, okay? And then your spending in retirement. And think
disciplined.
about how that's going to be different, right? Like think about how that could be different. Look at significant period of time.
Mhm,
Don't look at it. Don't even look at a year. Look at like 3, maybe, right? Like
correct.
2 or 3, and look at the most recent 2 or 3 because what happened 10 years ago, inflation exists. It's not going to be applicable,
Mhm.
right? So once you've got your cash flow, you can reduce it by things like your expected income from Social Security, provided you're going to keep working, provided you can get accurate numbers there. Let's just assume that you can from your Social
Go
Security,
to the Social Security
social,
website and
SSA.gov, and you can
yeah,
get your Social Security statements there,
yeah,
and they have reasonable calculators for you to math all of this
they're
out if you
good.
need
I
to.
mean,
Then you can reduce.
disclaimer, you're not going to be able to get within the penny of like your
Yeah,
dollar
no,
of what
don't
you
worry about
need,
that.
but you'll
Your
get
spending's not going to be within a penny either.
no, but you'll get a really good ballpark number, and the Social Security website is more
Right.
than sufficient
So
for
what
that.
we're trying to do then is you're trying to come up with so we got our we got our cash flow,
Yep.
and then we know how much income we're going to get from things like Social Security. For most of America, it's going to be Social Security, but it could also be your government pensions, your railroad pensions, things like that, right?
Yeah.
So any kind of pensions that are going to offset the income needs. We need to know what income we need.
Teachers have pensions too.
Sure. We need to know what income we need,
Yeah.
and then we can determine what kind of capital we need to substantiate that income, like to produce that income for us,
Yeah.
right? Either through withdrawals, like we said earlier, or through actual like coupons for bonds and dividends from stocks,
Correct.
and then we can generate it that way. So we can determine that, like what's your
Mhm.
comfort level there, and then you get some idea of a ballpark. Now, will that ballpark guarantee that you're successful? No. So we need to know what your risk tolerance is there. How likely do we need this plan to be to succeed?
Mhm.
And how willing are you to make adjustments
Yes.
along the way?
That's
Like
a
if the market
huge
tanks 20%, are you willing to
yes.
spend $1,000 a month? And are you able to spend $1,000 a month? It's so much easier,
Correct.
guys. This is this is a big one. It's so much easier to say, yes, I could spend $1,000 less a month.
Then
But then when it means when your friends are going to eat on a Friday night and you're like, nah, actually, I got to pass on this one. Can you actually do that?
it's hard. And it's also like I think adding in a layer of kids and things like that, it becomes really, really hard.
So then maybe if you can't, let's just assume that we're really honest with ourselves and you know what, we
I
really like to go get sushi, and if our friends are going to get sushi, we're going to get sushi too, right? Yeah, I'm
yeah,
in.
that's awesome.
I'm in. I know I'm in. So I'm
Yeah.
ready. So what that means is I might have to work an extra year. Maybe I need to work an extra 2 years, right? Like those are the kind of discussions that are worth
Yes.
having or we're thinking about.
But I think that that's the kind of comparison and comparative analysis that without getting granular with your cash flow analysis without running some projections, you won't know that. But like
Yeah,
to be able to say, like, is it worth to you working an extra year or putting off your retirement for an extra year to be able to continue eating sushi once a week?
yeah,
And if your answer is yes, that's great. You at least have that comparison to make. Your answer might be no, but now every time you're faced with that option of like, let's go to sushi, in the back of your head, you might be like, I'll have to work a whole other year.
right.
It makes it
At
easier to
least
then
you're
say,
aware of the costs, right?
correct,
So that's essentially what planners are going
correct,
to be doing is they're trying to make you aware of these costs. Like, what about a
correct.
summer house or like a beach house, right? Or a
Yes, correct.
a condo in Colorado, perhaps in Vail. I'm not
Or
even a Vail
annual
fanboy either.
passes to Universal.
It's gonna be a hard pass for me, but condo's still available.
Mhm.
But the idea is we want to know what the impact of a sports
Correct,
car is, right? If we're gonna make this
correct.
purchase, right? We want to know if we're gonna upgrade our house. at age 40? What impact does that have on my
And I think
retirement at age 60?
the purchases are a huge one. I'm glad you brought that up because oftentimes people who are, cash rich or have a certain influx of cash, that you've gotten a new job, so you have more there than you used to. And so you want to buy a nicer car, you want to buy a nicer house. You understand what the immediate impact is to your financial situation, but it's really, really hard to have a true grasp on what the long-term effects are because you're not putting those dollars into the
Right.
market. You're not getting compound interest. You're
Exactly
missing out
right.
on a lot of growth
Exactly
on
right.
money. So even if though you can afford the house, think about what those dollars might be able to do for you elsewhere. And
Correct.
so it's really, really, really hard to do without having somebody else as a thought partner or being able to say, like, this is actually what it would do.
Or at the very least, you guys do it yourself. You can do it
A
yourselves. You can.
thousand
You
percent.
certainly can. We're not saying
But
you
like
you
I
have
said,
to you have to
it'll
outsource it. You
require
don't
like
have
the
to.
social security website,
Right. Just do the legwork.
right? And then what was the other one? The retirement
I think it's
calculator.
myretirement.com. I
Yeah.
believe it is.
We can even put it in the description
Sure.
of the podcast. But there are certainly websites that can help you to quantify some of what we're talking about to
Mhm.
be able to at least run some of these situations for you. But um it's a multifaceted, very complex question when someone
Right.
says, am I on track? Can I retire? This is by no means the comprehensive piece, but the very first piece that we talk about is what does your retirement look like?
Mhm.
And let's look at your cash flow.
Right.
The second thing would be to start looking at
What levers we have
withdrawals and
access to, what levers
correct.
we can pull, and what impact those lever pulls have on your ultimate picture.
Correct. And sometimes we will have people come to us saying, am I on track to retire? And when we say, well, what's the most important thing for you in retirement? They don't necessarily know. Like not every 30, 40, even sometimes 50-year-old has thought about what that retirement looks like. So it's an important self-reflective piece that has to happen before you're diving into this because you've got to be brutally honest with
Oh,
yourself when
yeah.
you're talking about.
Absolutely.
Um, if you know that in retirement you're going to be spending more than 5, acknowledge that fact. So,
Right.
but this is essentially our first part of what we would look at if someone says, "Can I retire?"
That's right.
Yep.
Alrighty, guys. If you enjoyed today's episode, please review the show. And if you have any topics you would like discussed or financial problems you'd like solved, reach out to us at podcast@equilibriumfp.com or visit the website equilibriumfp.com.
Till next time.
Thanks, guys.